The morning sun cast long shadows across the cobblestone streets of London as Sarah Williams hurried along the sidewalk, her school bag bouncing against her hip. At 15, she had walked this route to school hundreds of times, but today felt different somehow. The usual bustling crowd seemed thinner, and an odd tension hung in the air that made her quicken her pace. Sarah lived with her grandmother in a small flat just 3 blocks from Westminster. Her parents had died in a car accident when she was 12, leaving her in the care of her elderly grandmother who worked as a seamstress to make ends meet. Despite their modest circumstances, Sarah was a bright student with dreams of becoming a teacher someday. She had learned to navigate London's busy streets with confidence, always staying alert to her surroundings as her grandmother had taught her. As she turned the corner onto Victoria Street, Sarah noticed a black cab idling near the curb. The driver, a middle-aged man with greasy hair and shifty eyes, sat behind the wheel watching pedestrians pass by. Something about his intense stare made Sarah uncomfortable. She had seen enough crime documentaries with her grandmother to know that predators often used vehicles to approach their victims. Her instincts told her to stay far away from the suspicious vehicle. The man in the cab was Derek Morrison, a 43-year-old with a long history of criminal behavior. He had been released from prison just 6 months earlier after serving time for assault and theft. Since his release, Morrison had been struggling to find legitimate work, and his anger toward society had been growing stronger each day. He blamed everyone else for his problems, and had begun planning ways to strike back at the world that he felt had wronged him. Morrison had been driving the stolen cab for 3 days, using it to scout for potential victims. He had developed a twisted plan to kidnap someone and demand ransom money, believing this would solve his financial problems. His criminal mind told him that a young person would be an easy target, and he had been lurking around schools and bus stops looking for the right opportunity. When he spotted Sarah walking alone, something dark awakened in his thoughts. Meanwhile, just 2 streets away, the household cavalry was conducting their daily ceremonial patrol through central London. Corporal James Mitchell rode his magnificent black horse, Thunder, with the pride and discipline that came from years of military service. At 28, Mitchell had served 2 tours in Afghanistan before joining the prestigious Queen's Life Guard. The ceremonial duties were important, to him representing centuries of British tradition and the protection of the royal family. Thunder was no ordinary horse. The 7-year-old stallion had been specially trained for military service and possessed an intelligence that often amazed his handlers. Thunder could sense danger and had an almost supernatural ability to read human emotions and intentions. The bond between Mitchell and Thunder had been forged through countless hours of training and mutual respect. They moved as one unit, each anticipating the other's actions without need for verbal commands. The morning patrol was routine, but Thunder seemed more alert than usual. His ears twitched constantly, and he occasionally turned his head as if listening for something only he could hear. Mitchell had learned to trust his horse's instincts completely. In Afghanistan, Thunder had saved his life twice by detecting hidden explosives that human senses had missed. The horse's behavior today suggested that something was amiss in their familiar territory. As Sarah continued walking, she tried to shake off her uneasiness about the black cab. She focused on her upcoming history exam, mentally reviewing the dates and events she had studied the night before. Her grandmother had helped her prepare by asking practice questions over dinner, and Sarah felt confident about her knowledge of World War II. Education was her escape from poverty, and she took her studies seriously, knowing that good grades were her ticket to a better future. The distance between Sarah and the cab was slowly decreasing as she walked along her normal route to school. Morrison watched her approach, his hands gripping the steering wheel tighter with each step she took. His criminal mind was calculating the perfect moment to act. He had noticed that this particular street had fewer security cameras than others, and the morning rush hour provided enough chaos to create confusion. His plan was simple but dangerous. Grab the girl quickly and drive away before anyone could react. Morrison's heart rate increased as Sarah came within 50 feet of his position. He checked his mirrors to ensure no police were visible, then reached for the door handle. The adrenaline rushing through his system made him feel powerful and reckless. He had convinced himself that this crime would change his life, giving him the money and control he desperately craved. The fact that he would be destroying an innocent young person's life never entered his twisted calculations. Thunder suddenly stopped in the middle of the street, his powerful muscles tensing beneath Mitchell's saddle. The horse's nostrils flared as he caught a scent that triggered his protective instincts. Mitchell immediately became alert, scanning the area for whatever had disturbed his trusted mount. Years of military experience had taught him never to ignore Thunder's warnings, and he prepared himself for potential action while maintaining the dignified posture required of a ceremonial guard. The convergence of these three lives, an innocent, student, a desperate criminal, and a vigilant guardian, was about to create a moment that would be remembered and talked about for years to come. Sarah continued walking toward an encounter that would test her courage. Morrison prepared to commit a crime that would define his character forever, and Mitchell sat ready to uphold his oath to protect and serve. The ancient streets of London had witnessed many dramas throughout history, but few would prove as compelling as the events about to unfold on this seemingly ordinary morning. Sarah was now just 30 feet from the black cab when Morrison made his move. The cab door swung open with sudden violence, and the predator leaped out onto the sidewalk with surprising speed for his bulky frame. His face was twisted with determination and desperation as he lunged toward the unsuspecting teenager. The sound of his heavy footsteps on the pavement echoed off the surrounding buildings, creating an ominous rhythm that seemed to announce the danger approaching. The attack happened so quickly that Sarah barely had time to process what was occurring. One moment she was thinking about her history exam, and the next she found herself face to face with a wild-eyed stranger who was reaching for her with rough, calloused hands. Her school bag fell from her shoulder as she instinctively stepped backward, her heart suddenly pounding with terror. Every self-defense lesson her grandmother had insisted she take flashed through her mind, but fear momentarily paralyzed her ability to react. Morrison's hands grabbed for Sarah's arm, his grip surprisingly strong from years of manual labor in prison. His breath smelled of stale cigarettes and alcohol, and his eyes held a madness that made Sarah realize she was in mortal danger. He began pulling her toward the open cab door, muttering threats under his breath about what would happen if she screamed or tried to resist. His criminal experience had taught him that speed and intimidation were key to successfully abducting someone in broad daylight. The few pedestrians on the street initially didn't understand what they were witnessing. To casual observers, it might have looked like a father trying to discipline a rebellious teenager. Morrison had counted on this confusion to give him the precious seconds he needed to complete his crime. However, Sarah's genuine terror was becoming more obvious with each passing moment, and her struggles were clearly those of someone fighting for her life, rather than simply being difficult. 2 blocks away, Thunder's agitation had reached a level that demanded immediate action. The powerful horse began moving without waiting for Mitchell's command, his hooves clattering against the cobblestones with increasing urgency. Mitchell trusted his mount's judgment completely and allowed Thunder to choose their direction, knowing that the horse's instincts were guiding them toward something important. The other guards in their patrol noticed the unusual behavior, but followed Mitchell's lead as Thunder broke into a controlled gallop. Thunder's military training had included scenarios where quick response to civilian emergencies was required. The horse had an almost supernatural ability to navigate through London traffic, weaving between cars and pedestrians with graceful precision. Mitchell held on tightly, his ceremonial sword bouncing at his side as they raced through the streets. The distinctive sound of approaching cavalry hooves began to cut through the morning noise, though Morrison was too focused on his crime to notice the approaching help. Sarah found her voice and began to scream, her cries for help echoing off the nearby buildings. Her grandmother had always told her to make as much noise as possible if anyone ever tried to hurt her. The sound was piercing and desperate, finally alerting nearby pedestrians that something terrible was happening. A businessman stopped his phone conversation and began walking toward the struggle, while an elderly woman started shouting for someone to call the police. Morrison's plan was falling apart as more attention focused on his actions. He had expected to grab Sarah and disappear into the cab within seconds, but her resistance was stronger than he had anticipated. His desperation made him more violent, and he began trying to drag her toward the vehicle with increasing force. The teenager's feet scraped against the rough pavement as she fought to maintain her footing and prevent being forced into the cab. The sound of Thunder's approaching hooves grew louder, though Morrison remained oblivious to the help racing toward them. The horse's powerful stride covered ground quickly, and Mitchell could now see the struggle taking place ahead of them. His military training kicked in immediately as he assessed the situation and prepared to intervene. The sight of a young girl being attacked triggered every protective instinct he possessed, both as a soldier and as a human being. Sarah's strength was beginning to fail as Morrison's superior size and weight began to overpower her. She could see the dark interior of the cab getting closer, and panic gave her a final surge of energy to resist. Her fingernails clawed at Morrison's hands, leaving bloody scratches that only made him more angry and determined. She knew that, if he succeeded in getting her into that vehicle, her chances of survival would drop dramatically. Thunder rounded the final corner at full gallop, his massive form creating an impressive and intimidating sight. Mitchell sat tall in the saddle, his red ceremonial tunic and polished helmet catching the morning sunlight. The combination of horse and rider represented centuries of British military tradition and the unwavering commitment to protect the innocent. Mitchell's hand moved instinctively to his sword as he prepared for whatever action might be necessary. The businessman who had been walking toward the struggle suddenly understood the severity of the situation and began running to help. His shouts joined Sarah's screams, creating a crescendo of noise that finally penetrated Morrison's criminal focus. The predator looked up for the first time since beginning his attack and saw multiple people converging on his position. His window of opportunity was closing rapidly, and desperation made him even more dangerous. Morrison made one final violent attempt to force Sarah into the cab. He wrapped his arm around her waist and began lifting her off the ground, ignoring her kicks and screams. The teenager's feet left the pavement as the predator's adrenaline gave him supernatural strength. For a terrible moment it seemed as though his criminal plan might succeed, despite the growing attention from witnesses. Thunder's hooves pounded against the street with increasing intensity as the distance between horse and criminal decreased rapidly. Mitchell could see the fear in the young girl's eyes and the desperation in her attacker's movements. Every second counted now, and both horse and rider were pushing themselves to their absolute limits to reach the scene in time to prevent a tragedy that would scar everyone involved. Thunder burst onto the scene like a force of nature, his powerful presence immediately changing the dynamics of the desperate struggle. The magnificent stallion positioned himself directly between Morrison and the cab door, his massive body creating an impenetrable barrier that blocked the criminal's escape route. Morrison looked up in shock and confusion, his grip on Sarah loosening momentarily as he tried to process this unexpected intervention. The sight of the imposing cavalry horse and its uniformed rider was unlike anything he had planned for in his criminal calculations. Mitchell's voice cut through the morning air with commanding authority as he shouted for Morrison to release the girl immediately. His military training had prepared him for situations requiring quick, decisive action, and there was no hesitation in his response to the crisis unfolding before him. The corporal's years of experience in combat zones had taught him how to project strength and control, even in chaotic situations, and his presence alone began to shift the balance of power in Sarah's favor. Sarah felt the criminal's grip weaken and seized the opportunity to break free from his grasp. She twisted away from Morrison's hands and stumbled backward, putting precious distance between herself and her attacker. Her school uniform was torn and dirty from the struggle, and tears streamed down her face, but she was alive and free. The teenager's eyes met Mitchell's for a brief moment, and she saw the reassurance and protection that his presence represented. For the first time since the attack began, she felt hope that she might survive this ordeal. Morrison's criminal mind raced as he evaluated his rapidly deteriorating situation. The horse blocked his path to the cab, making escape impossible in that direction. Growing numbers of witnesses surrounded the scene, and he could hear someone shouting that the police had been called. His simple plan to grab a victim and disappear had evolved into a complex situation with multiple variables he couldn't control. The predator's desperation began to transform into rage as he realized his scheme was collapsing around him. Thunder stood firm in his position, his dark eyes fixed on Morrison with an intensity that seemed to pierce the criminal's soul. The horse's Military training had included exercises designed to intimidate and control hostile individuals, and his imposing presence was having exactly the intended effect. Morrison found himself backing away from the stallion, despite his human intelligence, telling him that it was just an animal. Something primal in Thunder's demeanor suggested that this horse was far more dangerous than any ordinary mount. The businessman who had been running to help finally reached the scene and positioned himself near Sarah, creating another layer of protection between her and her attacker. His presence gave Mitchell additional confidence that the victim was being safeguarded, allowing the corporal to focus entirely on controlling Morrison. The growing circle of concerned citizens around the incident created witnesses who would be able to testify about what they had observed, making it impossible for Morrison to escape accountability for his actions. Mitchell dismounted from Thunder, with fluid grace, his boots hitting the pavement with authority. The corporal's hand remained near his ceremonial sword, though he hoped the weapon would not be necessary to resolve the situation. His physical presence on the ground created an even more direct confrontation with Morrison, who found himself facing a trained soldier rather than just an impressive horse and rider. The criminal began to understand that his opponent possessed skills and experience that far exceeded his own. Morrison's eyes darted around the scene looking for any possible escape route, but Thunder's strategic positioning had effectively trapped him. The horse seemed to anticipate every direction the criminal might try to run, shifting his massive body to maintain the barrier between Morrison and freedom. Years of military service had taught Thunder to work as part of a team with his rider, and the stallion was executing his role in controlling the situation with remarkable intelligence and precision. Sarah had retreated to a safe distance, but remained close enough to provide testimony about her attacker's identity and actions. The teenager's courage was returning as she realized that help had arrived and that Morrison no longer posed an immediate threat to her safety. Her grandmother had always told her to be strong in difficult situations, and Sarah drew upon that advice as she prepared to face whatever legal proceedings might follow. She knew that her testimony would be crucial in ensuring that Morrison faced justice for his crimes. The sound of approaching sirens began to fill the air as London's Metropolitan Police responded to the emergency calls from witnesses. Morrison heard the approaching help and realized that his window for escape was closing completely. His criminal experience told him that once the police arrived, his chances of avoiding capture would become virtually zero. The predator's desperation reached new heights as he contemplated the long prison sentence that awaited him if he was caught. Mitchell maintained his position between Morrison and any potential victims, his military bearing projecting confidence and control over the situation. The corporal's training had included crowd control and civilian protection scenarios, and he was implementing those lessons perfectly in this real-world crisis. His partnership with Thunder was proving to be more effective than any single human could have been in preventing Morrison from completing his intended crime. Thunder's ears remained constantly alert, monitoring not just Morrison, but the entire surrounding area for any additional threats or complications. The horse's training had taught him to maintain situational awareness even while focused on a primary target, and he was demonstrating that skill beautifully in this complex urban environment. The stallion's presence continued to have a psychological impact on Morrison that went beyond simple physical intimidation. Morrison made one final desperate glance toward his stolen cab, calculating whether he could somehow reach the vehicle and escape before the police arrived. However, Thunder's positioning made it clear that any attempt to reach the car would require getting past both horse and rider, a prospect that seemed increasingly impossible. The criminal began to realize that his choices were rapidly narrowing: to surrender or face the consequences of resisting trained military personnel and law enforcement officers. The police sirens grew louder as 3 patrol cars converged on the scene from different directions, their blue lights flashing against the morning sky. Morrison's face contorted with a mixture of rage and defeat as he realized his criminal enterprise had failed completely. The predator looked around at the growing crowd of witnesses, the imposing military presence, and the approaching law enforcement, understanding that his freedom was measured in seconds rather than minutes. His hands clenched into fists as he wrestled with the decision of whether to surrender peacefully or make one final desperate stand. Detective Inspector Patricia Hayes was the first officer to exit her patrol car, her experienced eyes immediately assessing the situation. At 45, Hayes had seen countless crimes during her 20-year career with the Metropolitan Police, but the sight of a cavalry horse and rider maintaining control over a suspect was certainly unusual. She quickly identified Mitchell as military personnel and began coordinating with him to ensure the scene remained secure, while additional officers positioned themselves around Morrison. Sarah found herself surrounded by concerned citizens who had witnessed her ordeal and wanted to ensure she was safe. The teenager was still shaking from the trauma of the attack, but her natural resilience was beginning to reassert itself. A kind elderly woman offered her a tissue and a bottle of water, while the businessman who had come to her aid stayed nearby to provide moral support. Sarah's thoughts turned to her grandmother, who would be terrified when she learned about what had happened. Thunder maintained his vigilant watch over Morrison, the horse's intelligent eyes tracking every movement the criminal made. The stallion's military training included riot control techniques, and he was demonstrating perfect discipline in maintaining his position without showing aggression unless it became necessary. Mitchell remained mounted, creating an imposing silhouette against the London skyline that served as both protection and a symbol of justice prevailing over criminal intent. Morrison's criminal background had not prepared him for facing trained military personnel and professional law enforcement simultaneously. His previous crimes had been opportunistic affairs against unprepared victims, not calculated confrontations with people trained to handle dangerous situations. The predator began to understand that his amateur criminal skills were completely inadequate against the coordinated response he was facing. Detective Inspector Hayes approached Mitchell and quickly established communication protocols between military and civilian law enforcement. Her professional respect for the corporal's actions was evident as she coordinated positioning and ensured that Morrison remained contained while other officers secured the scene. The inspector's experience told her that this situation could have ended in tragedy without the intervention of Thunder and his rider. Additional police units arrived and began the process of gathering witness statements from the growing crowd of people who had observed the incident. Sarah found herself the center of attention as officers prepared to take her detailed account of Morrison's attack. The teenager's clear recollection of events would prove crucial in building a strong case against her attacker, and she was determined to provide accurate testimony despite her emotional trauma. Morrison's stolen cab was quickly identified and secured by police technicians who would search it for evidence linking him to other potential crimes. The vehicle's registration had already been reported as stolen 3 days earlier, adding another charge to the growing list of offenses Morrison would face in court. His fingerprints were found throughout the cab's interior, providing undeniable physical evidence of his possession of the stolen vehicle. Thunder began to relax slightly as more police officers arrived and took control of the situation, but the horse remained alert and ready to act if Morrison made any sudden movements. The stallion's behavior demonstrated the high level of training that all household cavalry horses received, showing intelligence and discipline that impressed even the experienced police officers on the scene. Mitchell's partnership with Thunder had proven invaluable in preventing what could have been a devastating crime. The growing crowd of witnesses included several people with smartphones who had recorded portions of the incident, providing additional evidence that would support the case against Morrison. Modern technology was creating an unprecedented level of documentation for criminal proceedings, making it increasingly difficult for perpetrators to deny their actions or claim innocence. Morrison's face was clearly visible in multiple recordings, eliminating any possibility of mistaken identity. Detective Inspector Hayes began the formal process of placing Morrison under arrest, reading him his rights while other officers prepared to transport him to the police station for booking and initial questioning. The predator's criminal record would soon be discovered, revealing his history of violent behavior and explaining the escalation to attempted kidnapping. His recent release from prison would be noted as a significant factor in understanding his motivations and assessing his danger to society. Sarah's emotional state was carefully monitored by victim support specialists who had arrived with the additional police units. The teenager would need counseling and support to process the trauma of her attack, but her quick thinking and fighting spirit had undoubtedly saved her from a much worse fate. Her courage in resisting Morrison had bought precious time for help to arrive and demonstrated remarkable maturity under extreme pressure. Mitchell received commendations from multiple police supervisors for his quick response and professional handling of the situation. The corporal's actions would be reported up through both military and civilian channels, likely resulting in formal recognition for his service above and beyond normal ceremonial duties. His partnership with Thunder had exemplified the highest traditions of the household cavalry and their commitment to protecting British citizens. The investigation into Morrison's background revealed connections to other unsolved crimes in the London area, suggesting that his attack on Sarah might have been part of a larger pattern of criminal behavior. Detectives would spend weeks following up on leads and connecting Morrison to additional offenses, building a comprehensive case that would ensure he faced appropriate consequences for all his crimes. The stolen cab was just the beginning of a much larger criminal investigation. The courtroom was packed 3 months later as Morrison faced trial for attempted kidnapping, assault, theft of a motor vehicle, and several other charges that had been uncovered during the investigation. Sarah sat in the witness box, her voice steady and clear as she recounted the terrifying moments when Morrison had tried to drag her into the stolen cab. The teenager had grown stronger during the months following her attack, supported by counseling services and the love of her grandmother, who attended every day of the trial. Mitchell appeared in his dress uniform to testify about his intervention, his military bearing commanding respect from everyone present in the courtroom. The corporal's detailed account of Thunder's behavior and their coordinated response provided crucial testimony about the severity of the situation and the immediate danger Sarah had faced. His professional demeanor and credible witness testimony helped establish the timeline of events and the criminal intent behind Morrison's actions. Thunder had become something of a celebrity in London, following news reports about his role in preventing the kidnapping. The household cavalry had received hundreds of letters from grateful citizens praising the horse's intelligence and bravery, along with requests for public appearances and demonstrations. The military carefully managed Thunder's newfound fame, while ensuring that his ceremonial duties remained the primary focus of his service. The prosecution presented overwhelming evidence against Morrison, including DNA evidence from the cab, witness testimony from multiple people who had observed the attack, smartphone recordings of the incident, and Morrison's own criminal history. The defendant's lawyer struggled to find any credible defense for actions that had been witnessed by dozens of people and recorded on multiple devices. Morrison's previous convictions for violent crimes established a clear pattern of escalating criminal behavior. Sarah's grandmother testified emotionally about the impact the attack had on their family and her granddaughter's recovery process. The elderly woman's testimony helped the jury understand the human cost of Morrison's actions and the lasting trauma that attempted kidnapping creates for victims and their families. Her words carried particular weight because of her obvious love for Sarah and her dignified presentation of their difficult circumstances. Detective Inspector Hayes presented the investigation findings, revealing that Morrison was connected to at least 3 other unsolved crimes in the London area during the weeks before his attack on Sarah. The additional evidence painted a picture of an escalating criminal who was becoming increasingly bold and dangerous with each offense. Her professional testimony helped establish Morrison as a serious threat to public safety, who needed to be removed from society. The defense attorney's attempts to portray Morrison as a victim of circumstances fell flat in the face of overwhelming evidence and witness testimony. His criminal history, the premeditated nature of using a stolen cab for the attack, and the clear intent to harm an innocent teenager made it impossible to generate sympathy for the defendant. The lawyer's closing arguments focused on requesting leniency in sentencing rather than claiming innocence. Mitchell's commanding officer testified about the exceptional nature of Thunder's response to the emergency and the high level of training required for such intervention. The military testimony helped establish the credibility of both horse and rider, while emphasizing the professional skills that had prevented a tragedy. The officer's words carried additional weight because of his own distinguished military career and experience with cavalry operations. Multiple witnesses, testified about observing Morrison's suspicious behavior in the days leading up to the attack, providing evidence of his premeditated criminal planning. Shop owners, pedestrians, and other cab drivers had noticed his unusual patterns of movement and loitering near schools and bus stops. Their collective testimony painted a picture of systematic predatory behavior that had culminated in the attack on Sarah. The jury deliberated for less than 2 hours before returning guilty verdicts on all charges against Morrison. The speed of their decision reflected the overwhelming nature of the evidence and the clear threat the defendant posed to society. Sarah felt a wave of relief when the foreman read the guilty verdicts, knowing that Morrison would not be able to hurt her or anyone else for many years to come. Judge Victoria Whitmore delivered a stern sentence of 12 years in prison, emphasizing the serious nature of Morrison's crimes and his danger to the community. Her words reflected the court's determination to protect potential future victims from someone who had demonstrated an escalating pattern of violent criminal behavior. The judge specifically commended the intervention of Mitchell and Thunder, noting that their actions had prevented what could have been a much more serious crime. Sarah's victim impact statement brought tears to many eyes in the courtroom as she described her recovery process and her determination not to let Morrison's actions define her life. The teenager spoke about her continued commitment to her education and her dream of becoming a teacher, showing remarkable resilience in the face of trauma. Her words demonstrated the strength of character that had helped her survive the initial attack and recover from its emotional impact. Morrison showed no remorse during the sentencing phase, maintaining a defiant attitude that reinforced the judge's decision to impose a lengthy prison term. His lack of acceptance of responsibility for his actions suggested that he remained a danger to society and was unlikely to be rehabilitated without intensive intervention. The defendant's behavior in court confirmed the wisdom of removing him from the community for an extended period. The trial's conclusion brought closure to Sarah and her family, allowing them to focus on rebuilding their lives without the uncertainty of pending legal proceedings. The teenager had grown stronger through the process of seeking justice, and her courage in testifying had helped ensure that Morrison would face appropriate consequences for his crimes. Her grandmother expressed gratitude to Mitchell, Thunder, and all the law enforcement officers who had worked to bring Morrison to justice. Mitchell received formal commendations from both military and civilian authorities for his exemplary service in protecting a British citizen. The recognition included mentions in official military records and letters of appreciation from senior government officials. His actions had exemplified the highest traditions of military service and the household cavalry's commitment to protecting the people of Britain, even when such protection extended beyond their normal ceremonial duties. 2 years after the trial, Sarah Williams stood at the podium during her high school graduation ceremony, delivering the valedictorian address to her graduating class. Her speech focused on resilience, courage, and the importance of community support in overcoming life's challenges. The teenager who had once been a victim of attempted kidnapping had transformed into a confident young woman with a bright future ahead of her. Her grandmother sat in the front row, tears of pride streaming down her weathered face as she listened to Sarah speak about turning trauma into triumph. Sarah's academic achievements had earned her a full scholarship to study education at Cambridge University, fulfilling her dream of becoming a teacher. Her experience with trauma and recovery had inspired her to specialize in helping children who had faced difficult circumstances. The young woman had channeled her painful experience into a passion for helping others overcome their own challenges and achieve their potential, despite adverse circumstances. During her final year of school, Sarah had volunteered at local youth centers, teaching self-defense classes and confidence-building workshops for young girls. Mitchell continued his distinguished service with the household cavalry, though his experience with Sarah's rescue had deepened his understanding of his role as protector of British citizens. The corporal had been promoted to sergeant and was frequently called upon to share his experience with new cavalry members, emphasizing the importance of remaining alert and ready to act even during routine ceremonial duties. His partnership with Thunder remained as strong as ever, and their bond had become legendary within military circles, inspiring other cavalry units throughout the British military. Thunder, now 9 years old, continued his ceremonial duties with the wisdom that came from experience. The stallion's keen intelligence and protective instincts had made him one of the most respected horses in the household cavalry, and his story was often shared with visitors who came to see the famous military horses. Thunder's role in preventing Sarah's kidnapping had become part of official military history, demonstrating how properly trained cavalry horses could serve functions far beyond ceremonial display. The horse had received special recognition from the royal family for his service to the public. Detective Inspector Hayes had been promoted to Chief Inspector, partly in recognition of her professional handling of Morrison's case and the subsequent investigation that linked him to numerous other crimes. Her work had led to the resolution of several cold cases and had established new protocols for investigating predatory criminal behavior. Hayes frequently spoke at law enforcement conferences about the importance of coordinated responses between military and civilian authorities, using Morrison's case as a perfect example of successful inter-agency cooperation. Morrison remained in Pentonville Prison, serving his 12-year sentence with little prospect of early release due to his continued behavioral problems and lack of rehabilitation progress. The former predator had become withdrawn and bitter, spending most of his time in solitary confinement after multiple altercations with other inmates. His criminal career had effectively ended with his failed attempt to kidnap Sarah, though he showed no signs of understanding the gravity of his actions or accepting responsibility for the harm he had tried to cause. The businessman who had rushed to help Sarah that morning had become involved in victim advocacy work, using his experience as a witness to support legislation aimed at protecting vulnerable individuals from predators. His testimony before Parliament had helped strengthen laws regarding attempted kidnapping and had increased funding for victim support services. His spontaneous decision to intervene had evolved into a lifelong commitment to public safety, and he had established a foundation that provided self-defense training for young people throughout London. Sarah's story had been featured in numerous media outlets as an example of courage, community response, and the unexpected heroes who sometimes appear in moments of crisis. The young woman had used her platform to advocate for self-defense education and awareness training for teenagers, helping others develop the skills and confidence needed to protect themselves from potential predators. Her speaking engagements had raised thousands of pounds for victim support charities, and she had written a book about her experience that became a bestseller among young adult readers. The relationship between Sarah's family and Mitchell had evolved into a lasting friendship, based on mutual respect and gratitude. The sergeant occasionally visited Sarah and her grandmother, sharing updates about Thunder and his continued service with the household cavalry. These visits provided comfort to both families, connecting them through their shared experience of that frightening morning when evil had been confronted and defeated. Sarah often brought treats for Thunder during these visits, and the horse seemed to remember her with gentle affection. Thunder's legacy extended beyond his role in Sarah's rescue. To inspire improvements in cavalry training protocols, military instructors began emphasizing the horse's natural protective instincts and their ability to respond to threatening situations independently of human direction. Thunder's example had demonstrated that properly trained military horses could serve as partners in public safety, rather than simply ceremonial displays. The household cavalry had implemented new training modules based on Thunder's actions, teaching both horses and riders to recognize and respond to civilian emergencies. Community leaders in Sarah's neighborhood had organized annual safety awareness events to commemorate the anniversary of her rescue and to educate residents about personal safety measures. These gatherings brought together police officers, military personnel, and citizens to discuss ways of preventing similar crimes and supporting victims of violence. The events had strengthened community bonds and created networks of mutual support that made the area safer for everyone, with crime rates dropping significantly in the years following Morrison's arrest. Sarah's grandmother had found peace in knowing that her granddaughter's ordeal had led to positive changes that would protect other young people from similar dangers. The elderly woman had become involved in neighborhood watch programs and frequently shared safety tips with other grandparents raising children in challenging urban environments. Her wisdom and experience had made her a respected voice in community safety discussions, and she often spoke at local schools, about the importance of teaching children to trust their instincts and seek help when they felt threatened. The stolen cab that Morrison had used in his attempted crime had been returned to its rightful owner after serving as evidence in the trial. The vehicle's owner had donated the insurance settlement money to victims' rights organizations, ensuring that some good would come from his unfortunate experience. His generosity had helped fund counseling services for other crime victims and had supported programs aimed at preventing similar offenses, creating a lasting positive impact from what had initially been a traumatic experience for him as well. As Sarah prepared to begin her studies at Cambridge University, she reflected on how a single moment of terror had ultimately led to a deeper appreciation for life's possibilities and the importance of helping others. Her journey from victim to survivor to advocate had demonstrated the resilience of the human spirit and the power of community support in overcoming even the most frightening experiences. The young woman who had once been dragged toward a predator's cab was now ready to shape the future as an educator and advocate for those who needed protection and support. 5 years later, Sarah had graduated with honors and returned to London as a qualified teacher, specializing in working with children who had experienced trauma. Her first assignment was at a school in her old neighborhood, where she could make a direct impact on young people facing the same challenges she had once known. Mitchell and Thunder, now promoted to senior positions within the household cavalry, continued their ceremonial duties while training new generations of military personnel in both traditional protocols and emergency response techniques. The morning sun that had witnessed Morrison's failed crime continued to rise each day over London, illuminating a city where ordinary people like Mitchell, Thunder, and Sarah could become extraordinary heroes when circumstances demanded courage and action. Their story had become part of London's rich history of citizens standing together against those who would prey upon the innocent, proving that evil could be confronted and defeated when good people refused to remain silent or passive in the face of injustice. The legacy of that terrifying morning had transformed into a beacon of hope and a reminder that even in the darkest moments, help could arrive in the most unexpected forms, changing not just individual lives but entire communities for the better.